If you told me 6 years ago that I'd end up speaking with Mr. Dinesh D'Souza, I wouldn't have believed you. And yet, here we are. Now, just in case you don't know, Dinesh D'Souza yet is one of the most influential voices on the American right and the world expert on Christianity and politics. Now, I spent 2 weeks planning this conversation, and these are the three topics I chose for you to enjoy: the unbelievable rise of anti-Semitism on the American right, especially for young people, why Christianity still plays such a big role in modern US politics, and the profound differences between Judaism and Christianity most people miss. If you like this conversation, please consider subscribing to the channel, hit the bell button, and be part of our great community. And let me know what you think in the comments below. If you want to support us, you can either do it by YouTube Super Thanks or via our Patreon page. And now, Mr. Dinesh D'Souza. Dinesh D'Souza, thank you so much for coming. How are you today?
I'm doing well, and it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure, and it is my dream to have you on the show. And we don't have a lot of time, so let's start. And I think that we start, I want you, you're an expert on Christianity and the connection between Christianity and the modern state. And the first question I would like to ask you is, what is, or is there such a thing as political Christianity? Like, how do Christian manifest itself in the modern state? We know the roots in the New Testament: give Caesar what Caesar and God's what's God. We have the roots of separation of state and church. But in your opinion, what is, if anything at all, is political Christianity?
Well, if we take a glance at history, in the first 4 centuries, Christianity was a kind of fugitive presence in the Roman state. But once Constantine converted and Christianity became the religion of the Roman state, I think that represented the true birth of political Christianity, which inaugurated an era that I think could be called Christendom. So Christendom is when Christianity is somehow wedded to the government. It doesn't necessarily mean a theocracy. We're not talking about priests running the government, but we are talking about a church that has political power. At certain times in the past, the churches have had armies. And so this was the notion of throne and altar coexisting side by side for a good deal of European and Western history. In the modern era, you began to see the rise of government that was more detached from the church. The American founders, for example, did not want an official church, but it doesn't mean that they didn't want Christianity to be a powerful institution in society, or even institutions, because there were many different Protestant brands of Christianity. And I think they certainly expected Christianity to have a formative role in the culture, in shaping people's habits and mores and beliefs. And so in America, at any event, Christianity has been detached from the official role in government, but it has played a larger or lesser role in shaping society. Clearly, in the time of Tocqueville in the early 19th century, Christianity was very powerful in shaping people's conduct and their mores and their beliefs. Obviously, there has been a good deal of secularization since then. Christianity, in some ways, is quite lukewarm compared to the way it used to be, but it's still a force to be reckoned with.
And can we say that the founding fathers wanted the United States to be a Christian state, and therefore they wanted to detach Christianity from the formal institutions? In other words, if you detach Christianity from all other institutions, all governmental institutions, you free Christianity, and we do indeed, as the founding father wanted, America to be a Christian state?
Yes, the founders believed that a single regimented or imposed form of Christianity was bad for the government. It would introduce an element of autocracy, but also bad for Christianity because it would create a Christianity that was forcing itself on people. And the core idea of Christianity is not to do that. So the founders believed, let Christianity flourish in the private sphere outside of government. This is not to say that the moral law that comes from Judaism and Christianity, by the way, is not going to have an impact on the formation of laws. I think the founders were very sensitive to the distinction between theology and morality. So they didn't want to impose a singular theology. They were perfectly comfortable with what you would call Christian or Judeo-Christian morality.
I once heard Danish Prager said that capitalism cannot be achieved morally unless the state believes in the Ten Commandments. And this is very interesting. This is Prager idea that you need a very moral, religious foundation in order for capitalism not to be like a monstrous thing. And I would like to hear your take on that. Can we have a totally secular capitalism state, or we basically cannot have it without a solid religious foundation?
Well, as I think about this question, which I haven't thought about quite this way before, I'll frame it a slightly different way. So for the past 30 years, thereabouts, I have been giving speeches to various universities, Republican groups, Lincoln dinners. Now, here's what's interesting. Somebody will call me or email me that I don't know, I've never met. They will say, we want to invite you to come and speak on so-and-so date at so-and-so place, and we will pay you a fee which was payable after you have given your speech. Now, what happens is I, taking them at their word, will show up at this venue on so-and-so date at considerable inconvenience to me, and almost inevitably, they will end up paying me afterward. Now, think about this for a minute. The level of social trust that has to be in place for a simple transaction like this to occur repetitively over 30 years. I have not been, I would say, stiffed. Stiffed in America means they have you come and do the work and they don't pay you. In 30 years, it might have happened to me 3 times. So, and we're talking about hundreds of events. So this is just a way of reinforcing, I think, the point you're getting at, which is to say that it's not simply a matter of we made a contract, because the contract is the least of it. Somebody could have signed a piece of paper, but again, like I say, A, I don't know them. B, I'm not really going to sue them anyway. Let's say they didn't pay me. It's going to cost me more to go to court to collect that money. So in reality, this transaction is completely on a sort of, you could call it an online handshake. And yet the system would completely break down. I would stop doing it if it turns out that, let's say, 1 in every 2 times, nobody was there when I showed up to pick me up at the airport, or I did the event and I never got paid. The whole system would break down. So I just use this simple example as an illustration of the degree of taken for granted inbuilt social trust that there needs to be. And I think this does come out of an ethical and perhaps also a religious foundation.
And again, if I want, to delve into what you just said, we need to speak about, okay, is there can be and exist a secular foundation of morality like Sam Harris, but it is not our topic today. But again, what you just said, if I want to encapsulate it, is in order for capitalism to work, we need a very solid ethical foundation. And I think you also believe that those foundations should be at least to some degree religious. Okay?
Yes.
Okay.
I agree with that. I think that where you have people, and I certainly know a number of people who would describe themselves as secular, but when you press them, you recognize that their foundation is religious, and by that I mean they're secular people standing on a religious hilltop. They may not be aware of the hilltop, but if you remove the hilltop, then you would recognize that their foundation would collapse. So that's what I'm getting at. In other words, if you talk to them and you press them, they would say things like, "Well, yeah, of course, Dinesh, they pay you because they have an interest in paying you, and they." In other words, people act in ethical ways for mercenary reasons. The businessman, for example, will treat his customer well because he wants a repeat customer, for example. But again, what I'm getting at is those kinds of arguments quickly break down when you recognize that in many instances, this logic does not apply. The people typically, for example, in my own example, who are inviting me to speak, I'm not their repeat customer. I'm going to speak one time and then I'm going to go speak someplace else. So if they were to decide to shaft me or cheat me, they would really pay no penalty for it that I'm aware of. And yet they don't do that. And why don't they do that? And the answer is because there is an inbuilt, you could say, ethic in them that believes in giving fair value for something that is, you've received something, you gotta reciprocate. And that is built into them. But I think that original impulse is fundamentally one that comes out of the sort of religious ethics of the world.
And I think that Jordan Peterson coined the term the leftover of a giant well, which is basically the Christianity. And again, this is very important. We don't say for a second that secular people are immoral. We only say that the rational or the foundation, the moral foundation of a secular theory is inconsistent. This is basically what we are saying, okay? Secular people are moral. This is no doubt about it. But the foundation are inconsistent. Now, my question is, in modern times, the West doesn't call itself the Christian world. It calls itself the free world. And first, it's very interesting when this pivot happened. But, many people say that the modern world is not Christian world, it's a free world, but George W. Bush will be a good example. He would say that freedom is the message of Christianity, freedom from Egypt, freedom from slavery, and that's the core message of all Judeo-Christian values. Idolatry is slavery and faith is freedom. So what do you think about that? Can we say that the modern world or the free world is basically a new adaptive version of the Christian world?
I would give that, I would say, a qualified yes. And by a qualified yes, I mean that there is, in Christianity, and by the way, in Judaism as well, going to the very beginning, the great emphasis on human freedom and human choice. God says to Adam and Eve, don't eat from this fruit because I say so, but Adam and Eve are free to eat from it, even though they will then face the consequences of doing that. The root of Christianity and of Judaism has always been that we are ultimately judged as individuals. We are not judged in any kind of corporate fashion. We appear as souls before God, and we either choose God or we choose to go the other way, and that choice is up to us. So freedom is a core idea. Now, that being said, I would add a corollary, which is that in a Christian society, you are not content merely to give people freedom of choice. If I can give an extreme example, if you were to say to the American founders, all right, we're going to have a free society in America, but when the 21st century comes along, we will have 350 million Americans, and all of them will choose freely to become, let's say, pornographers, right? Nobody's forced them. They've chosen freely. Would you, the American founders, consider the American experiment to be a success? Because freedom has been realized and people are making these choices on their own. I think the American founders would say, no, we would be horrified at this result, because for us, freedom exists for a purpose. Now, that purpose can be thwarted by coercion, but the purpose is not freedom itself. It is to use your freedom to go to a certain place. And so the founders, I think, would say, our idea of America is to have a prosperous society. It is to have orderly and healthy communities. It is to have strong families. It is to have a moral law that is widely respected in the society, and people choose to follow that moral law because it is not only God's law, but it's also the way to live a good life. So all of what I'm outlining here is not freedom itself, but it is the actual choices that are made under freedom. So I think that the libertarian or strict libertarian doctrine of freedom as an end goal and as the only goal of a society is insufficient.
And again, it's not just, it is not only that freedom is not the final ultimate goal, it is also life itself. Life cannot be the final ultimate goal, because if you die, if you have something to die for, you have something to live for. And I think this basically leads me to, okay, how does it all boils down to modern America right now? And let's take it. Let's start with Catholic, being Catholic. Okay, I have problem with the word. Okay, so in the American context, I think being Catholic often maps into cultural conservatism, and you can see a very clear example in the Supreme Court. The Republicans, the conservative, want only Catholic judge in the Supreme Court because they know for sure the Catholic judge will stay as they are. And I think Amy Coney Barrett is a very good example. When she was in her deposition, she said that if she faced a conflict between her faith and the law, she would excuse herself from there. So would you say that the main manifestation in modern America of being Catholic is cultural conservatism and not taking order from the Pope? We are not afraid that people, obey the Pope. We basically want being Catholic mean basically cultural conservatism.
This is a very interesting question. I would say that unlike the Protestants or unlike the evangelical Christians, by and large, if you can find an evangelical Christian in America, for the most part, you're going to get somebody who is pretty serious about their faith. On the other hand, if you find a typical Catholic in America, there's a big spectrum. There is what they call the Easter Sunday Catholic. There's the Catholic who, goes to Mass once a year. And then there's the devout Catholic who is, I would call it, a serious Catholic, a practicing Catholic, somebody who is, not only goes to Mass more regularly, but is, follows Catholic teaching, right? So yes, if you find a devout, the more serious, the more devout, the more often the Catholic goes to church, the more likely that you are looking at a Republican, you're looking at a conservative. Catholicism also has a very rich and strong intellectual tradition, and it's an intellectual tradition that is very used to speaking to people who are not Catholic, which is to say, is very used to translating Christian doctrines into secular language. This is why Alito is really good at this. This is why Amy Coney Barrett is really good at this. Clarence Thomas is really good at this. Whereas a lot of the evangelical Protestants, they are used to a biblical language, which is not the same as, say, the language of the Supreme Court. And so as a result, they tend to speak a more theological, in a more theological cadence or tone, whereas the Catholic is much more used to, in Catholicism, there is this idea called the natural law. And the natural law is the law of moral reasoning that is accessible to everybody. And so by and large, you're going to find Catholic justices who are a little bit more conversant with even a broader secular vocabulary that people who are not Christian, not even religious, can identify with.
This is very interesting. I never thought about it like this. Maybe I teach Maimonides, guide for the perplexed, and Maimonides, Thomas Aquinas, the idea of using the religious language and convert it into something else, the entire scholastic school of thought is very interesting what you just said. And indeed, we don't see it in the other form, like in the evangelic form. It's like more like a prophet thing, more like a biblical thing. And I think you phrase it beautifully. So let's move on to the evangelic. Okay, what do we need to do? It seems like this is the strongest power base of the Republican Party, and what do they stand for? Is it simply God, family, and country, or do we also add like the free market and the Protestant work ethic, like Max Weber? Okay, and how much of their identity is foreign policy, including strong support for Israel, which we see, the evangelicals, the best supporter of Israel.
Yeah, so I think it is a mistake to think that the primary root of evangelical support for Israel is somehow coming straight out of biblical promises to, say, Abraham and his descendants. I do think that most evangelicals believe that, but I think that their support for Israel is much more textured and more complex. So the way to understand it is to ask yourself, who is the typical evangelical Christian in America? What does that guy look like? What is his demographic description, right? So typically you're going to find that the typical evangelical is going to be some guy who is let's just say a family man, usually married, with children, sometimes small children, who runs a small business. The reason I'm sketching out this little profile is that their conservatism comes out of not just their faith, but it's coming out of a lot of things. They have small children. They want to live in a safe society. They don't want to have all these toxic influences in the culture. They're much more sensitive to that than, say, a single person, because they've got a family. So they are more invested in the family. They tend to be, in general, more patriotic, so that you'll find more evangelical Christians are likely to go to the military, for example. And they also like the idea of America representing something good and strong in the world. The typical evangelical is pretty realistic about foreign policy. They know that in the world you've got good guys and bad guys. They know that countries have friends and enemies, and they recognize that you want to be nice to your friends and you want to be tough against your enemies. So I think what I'm trying to say is that I think that evangelical support for Israel, it has a biblical component, but it also has this broader cultural and political component in which Israel is seen as on the side of the good guys, fighting the bad guys, sometimes fighting the bad guys better than we know how to do. And so I think we can see that support for Israel is sturdier than simply picking out a passage from the Bible and saying, okay, I'm for Israel because it says right here in the book of Genesis.
So it's not just for the Bible, it's not just for foreign policy, it's a complex mix of both. And again, you could also inject theology, because what does it mean to support Israel after Christianity should replace the Jewish people? So there is like a theological question needs to be answered. And if this question was answered or not, this is a different question. But there is again a theological complexity when a Christian supports Israel, basically. At least in my opinion, at least in my eyes as an Israeli Jew. Do you understand my perspective?
Yeah, I think so. I'm saying that the evangelical Christian, and in fact all Christians, have at least a somewhat dim awareness that Israel is our spiritual homeland. And this is where the prophets of the Bible lived. These are the roads that Jesus walked. And so there is a natural affinity. I think there's also an awareness, particularly among educated Christians, that the foundations of Western civilization are in Athens and Jerusalem. And Athens and Jerusalem each contribute certain distinctive elements, but Western civilization needs both pillars. One will not do. The secular people, alas, think that you can hold up the West on Athens alone. But I think that the Christians understand generally that Jerusalem also needs to be defended. And there is obviously a relationship between this root of Western civilization, this historical root, this cultural root, this moral root, and the nation of Israel and the Jewish people. So even if the ordinary Christian cannot spell out that connection, they're aware of it.
By the way, when I teach my students or on my lectures about the core difference between Athens and Jerusalem, I say that there is one big difference, that according to Athens, the beautiful implies the good. And we in Jerusalem think that the beautiful is orthogonal to the good. The beautiful can be good, but it doesn't imply the good. And this is a very big distinction between, Greek philosophy and Jewish philosophy. Right? It doesn't mean it could be beautiful. It says nothing about how good it is. And I want to move on, with your permission, to a very delicate question regarding missionary work. My editor is an expert on India, and there is a lot of missionary work from evangelical Christians or American evangelical Christian in India. And when USAID reports were published, a lot of money was thrown to this very goal. Missionary work in India, and Hindus do not like missionary work, Israeli also. And my question is, in your opinion, how central missionary work to the evangelics in the US?
Well, this is a tricky question on many levels. I'll say a few things that I think you'll find interesting. The first thing is that by and large, the Christian churches, Catholic and Protestant, have always seen missionary work as important because there are some religions in the world that are not interested in making converts. The ancient Zoroastrians didn't care about it. The Hindus don't care about it. By and large, the Jews don't care about it. They're not in the missionary business at all. But there are other religions in the world that believe in the importance of preaching the word, as they say. Now, the Catholic approach to conversion was much more, I would say, subtle, because what the Catholics did over many centuries in India, and my own family is a product of this, by the way. This is how my ancestors would have converted a long time ago. The Catholic Church's idea was that the missionaries or the priests would come to a particular town and they would start a hospital or they would start a school. and then they would start. They would provide some essential service in the town, and they would count on people's gratitude and enthusiasm, and then familiarity with who's doing this and why they're doing this as an instrument of bringing about conversions. Now, the evangelical approach, in general, much more like heavy-handed, much more. A group of evangelicals go to a town in India and they put up a huge tent and they begin a tent revival. And then all the local Hindus, particularly the Hindu authorities, are all very upset because they feel that very poor people are being lured into all this. So that's my first observation, the Catholic versus the Protestant style of missionary work. The second point I want to make is that I think in the Bible, carefully read, there is a great difference between missionary work that is to the world versus missionary work that is somehow aimed at the Jews. And I say this because in the Christian Bible, the Jews are in a kind of unique relationship with God. And so the message that at least I read out of the Bible is God and the Jews are going to work it out. This is not something for the Christians to get in the middle of. The Christians are actually trying to be, as the Apostle Paul says, grafted into the Jewish tree.
Stay away from this discussion. Let the Jews handle the thing with God. This is
I knew I would blow you away because no. So let me put it somewhat differently. In Christianity, it is the Jews who are the original missionaries to the Christians, right? Think about it. The apostles, who was Paul if not a missionary, and a missionary from the Jews to the Gentiles? I don't think that there is a clear sanction in the Bible for the Christians to do the opposite. So my own view is that Christians should preach the gospel to the world. Obviously, it has to be done in the right way, in the right place, at the right time, respecting other people and not trespassing on other people's rights, or, it has to be done the right way. But I think that the situation with the Jews is a little different. That's my own view.
I think it can be summarized to, haven't the Jewish people suffered enough? Something like that. And I think from the last, or one before last question is regarding Tucker Carlson. I had a conversation with Robert P. George on the show, and he's a very devoted conservative figure in the United States, part of the Heritage. Was part of the Heritage Foundation. And basically, what I asked him, it seems to, at least to the Israeli public, or to some of the Israeli public, that to say that Tucker Carlson just flip out doesn't solve the problem. Tucker Carlson is not a bug, it's a feature of the radical right in the US. And my question to you, because you are much more expert on Christianity, would you say also that the roots of the anti-Semitism of Tucker Carlson are also inherently connected to his interpretation of Christianity? I would say, for example, that Candace Owens is a great example because her husband believes in a sort of an anti-Semitism version of Christianity. How do you see the things with Tucker Carlson regarding Christianity?
The theological root of this is a little complex because I think in the early church, the Jews and the Christians were both isolated groups inside of a Roman Empire. They were, in a way, rivals with each other, and they were also subordinates to the Roman state. And this created a certain mentality within Christianity that was hostile to the Jews and also hostile to the Roman state. And early Christian polemics reflect this. It wasn't entirely one-sided. There was plenty of back and forth going on both sides. But both the Christians and the Jews didn't have power because the power, of course, was with the Romans. Now, fast forward to now. With Tucker Carlson, you do not have somebody who has fundamentally shown any interest in Christianity at all. Prior to this, his latest incarnation, he never spoke about it. He is a sort of a very lukewarm Anglican, and the Anglicans are actually famous for their lukewarmness. So, in my opinion, what happened here is that Tucker Carlson, it seems to me that his whole new incarnation, his whole new guise, comes out of a certain vehement opposition to the Jews in Israel. That's his starting point. Now, because it doesn't otherwise make any sense why he suddenly becomes sympathetic to Sharia, and he's suddenly sympathetic to Hamas, and he's suddenly sympathetic to Maduro, all positions that he would have found outrageous not so long ago. So I think Israel is the pivot on which the world turns for this guy. Now, I think Tucker Carlson realized who are some really strong supporters of Israel in the Republican Party. Answer: evangelical Christians. So Tucker goes, what better way to drive a wedge than to find a theological argument that I can throw at them? And so what Tucker has done, I think, is he has, with some help from others, he has kind of ransacked Christian history, and he has found a thread that goes back to the early Christians, and he's like, aha, I can use this as a battering ram, as a weapon that's going to further my cause. So I think what I'm trying to say to you is, I don't think Tucker is theologically motivated. I think that he's politically motivated, but he is looking for theological weapons that will enable him to confuse and divide the evangelical Christians. And theology is his resource for doing that.
Let's say I completely agree with you, and you, of course, understand and know Tucker Carlson much better than me. And Tucker Carlson uses a Machiavellian ways to pave his way to his goals. Let me state it differently. Let's take Turning Point USA. Let's take Charlie Kirk. As a devoted Christian and a very big supporter of Israel, when Charlie Kirk left, Charlie Kirk, gathered around him many Americans who also, became in love with Christianity, with religion, with everything. But when Charlie Kirk left, Turning Point USA is turning another direction. And it is not just for Tucker Carlson to blame. It seems that the roots of anti-Semitism are there. Charlie Kirk could take them, and steer them away and say, okay, I want to focus on this. But without Tucker Carlson, the moral, the theology is basically, you kill Jesus. And we have like a very good justification to hate you. I need someone like Charlie Kirk or Dinesh D'Souza, to help me go through, to navigate this. But without Dinesh D'Souza and Charlie Kirk and all the other good supporters of Israel, the theological foundations for anti-Semitism are there. Do you understand my point?
Yes, I do, but and I recognize that this epithet, the Jews killed Jesus, has been around for 2,000 years. But think about how strange it is at some level, right? And because look at it this way. Jesus is a Jew, right? And what you have, and this we can see this particularly now with for example, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. You see that in the 1st century and the 2nd century BC, there was enormous internecine Jewish controversies. Lots of different rabbis, lots of different groups. The Qumran community is over here. These people are desert isolationists. These people think the Messiah has come. These people are still waiting for the Messiah. So you've just got an enormously rich and diverse environment. Jesus is just one guy in that mix, right? Now, you have a movement that Jesus is part of that antagonizes the religious authorities. Jesus is tried, Jesus is crucified. Now, to say that the Jews killed Jesus is really strange. It would be kind of like saying that the Americans killed Abraham Lincoln. No, because Lincoln's an American, right? There was obviously a big fight in America. There were rival sides. The guy who killed Lincoln was a Confederate who had his own beef with Lincoln, his own beef with the North versus the South. So to say Americans killed Lincoln is a senseless statement. Now, of course, you will say, but nevertheless, it has been echoed through the centuries, and I agree with you. I think what you're saying is this.
Just a second, just one sentence. What I'm saying, and I think that you are preaching to the choir, because I absolutely agree with everything that you have to say, and I love to say you are preaching to the choir, is basically what happened 2,000 years ago has nothing to do with what happening right now in Turning Point USA. It could be that we killed Jesus, we did it. The idea, if you want to hate the Jews for some mysterious metaphysical reason, you have it, and you need people like you and like Charlie Kirk. You need like the good, the lighthouse. Yeah, you need these kind of people to say no, interpret it differently. Okay.
Yeah, I think that the soil in which this movement has taken root is a soil that has to do with young people today, many of them male, who have seen the opportunities that they expected for themselves dwindle away. They were shut out of the best colleges because they're white males. They were bombarded with feminist propaganda that said that men are bad and women are great. They were racially tormented for being white. They're colonizers, they're oppressors. Not only that, but they've grown up in an environment where conspiracy theories have been vindicated one after the other, and institutions that were previously trusted have lost their credibility. The FBI, the health authorities under COVID. So here's what I'm getting at. They're very susceptible to looking for a villain that is responsible for their plight, right? Now, over the past several years, many villains have been identified. Dr. Fauci is the villain. And no, it's not Dr. Fauci. It is Merrick Garland at the DOJ, or it's the police state or the deep state. Now, I think what happened is, and this was the twist that was introduced by the Tucker Carlsons of the world, not him alone, is they came along to these young people at a time when they're looking for someone to blame. And they basically said that you have all these conspiracies, A, B, C, and D, but there's a master conspirator who controls all the keys, and that is the Jews. So what Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens have done is they haven't created the conspiratorial mentality. It was already there. They haven't created the distrust of institutions. It was already there. Their innovation, if we can use that word, was simply to take all the conspiracies, embrace them, and then introduce it's almost like saying you have different keys that open different doors, but you have a master key that opens up all the doors. And that's the anti-Semitic element that has been poisoned into our public debate.
So you don't need to invent a scapegoat. You just need to point to the most famous or infamous scapegoat, the Jews. Now, I have 1.5 minutes. So I want to ask you, first, thank you so much for your wisdom. And like always, it's so fascinating, just hear you speak. And I would like to ask you two questions. One, could you name one book or two books that you have read in the last 5 years that actually changed your perspective of the world? This is question number one. And question number two, could you share with us one productivity tip? Because the amount of work, very, very high quality work that you can, produce is unfathomable. So please, just two of them. One book, that change your perspective, and one productivity tip.
Certainly. I think for a book that I've read recently that is very illuminating about America, this would be for someone who really wants to understand the different strands and fabrics of American culture. The book has a very weird name. It's by the historian David Hackett Fisher. It's called Albion Seed. It talks about the United States is divided into 4 or 5 big cultural spheres. There is the sphere of the Northeast. There's the sphere of the South. There's the sphere of the Midwest, which is sort of Mike Pence country. There's the sphere of like Texas and what can be called like the redneck country. And so the historian David Hackett Fisher traces these strains to waves of immigration that came to America from England, but from different parts of England and at different times in British history. And he shows that what we identify now in America, like this is what a Southerner is like, or this is what a New Englander is like. He shows you why that is the case and who these people are and where they came from. And it is just very absorbing, very fascinating.
And it even tracked the slang of those peoples in those communities, yes?
It's the slang, the mannerisms, the way they build their homes, the way they dress, their attitudes toward, let's just say, modesty, whether or not they're going to be rebellious against the government or conformist to the government's edicts. All of it is like sketched out with an ingenuity that you never see America quite the same way again. And I say this as somebody who was born in India, so I've always studied America kind of somewhat from the outside and also from the inside. Okay, let me turn to my productivity tip as we close out. I would say that my operating principle for a book and a film is the same. I start out by identifying an issue that I think is simmering like below the surface. It's not at the surface, because if it's at the surface, it would generally be fully treated and people would already have mapped it out. So it needs to be somewhat under the surface, but it's a really important issue. And then I do an inventory of what people are saying about it. And I say to myself, if all I'm going to do is take a side or advocate for one of the existing positions, then I have nothing truly original to say. What I need to do is identify something that I have to contribute that is different from anything else out there, and that is going to make people go, aha, or make people go, I never saw it that way, or throw a kind of new light on it. That is my starting point, and I don't undertake any project unless I think I can meet that criterion. So the issue is timely in a sort of enduring sense and important, and second of all, I have something truly original to say. Otherwise, I rather stay out of it and find something else to talk about.
Dinesh D'Souza, thank you so much for your time. It was mesmerizing. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
It means a lot. Really appreciate it. Thank you.